hearkening back to James Ham's appearance on Michael Scotto's podcast, he was asked about Kuzma, whether that was a possibility. Obviously, Kuzma this past offseason was somebody that the Kings were talking to. Seemed like there was progress in those talks, but I guess the conversations kind of went blank for a week plus, and ultimately the Kings went with Barnes. But Kuzma's always been someone connected with them, and Ham still believes that Kuzma is a viable option for the Kings, and his main rationale behind that is the fact that Kyle Kuzma's contract that he signed with the Wizards this offseason is front-loaded, meaning it regresses in price year by year. So with that, you'd be getting a guy that, has star power. It's getting paid a lot, but it would regress year by year as you need to pay, Sabonis's contract, Fox's contract. You'd be paying Murray at one point. You'll have to pay Monk this offseason. It sets up for a financial situation where you can improve while still having some financial flexibility as time goes on. Makes a lot of sense. Also, another factor that can make it interesting is that Tyus Jones is there. He's got a tradable contract, I think, at about $14 million a year.
And I think he's on it expires after this season, too. I think it's on
just a 1-year deal?
I believe so.
So that even increases the fact that the Wizards, who are a historically bad team this year, especially on the defensive end. So you could maybe pull off a trade to get Kuzma and get Tyus Jones, and that could set up for a situation where maybe you move Monk to the starting lineup. You got Jones as your sixth man in the guard position. You got Kuzma starting for Barnes. You've just technically upgraded Herter and Barnes in a trade situation. But the question becomes, how much are you upgrading with Kuzma, and is it in the right areas? Are you sold on any idea of moving to Kuzma?
I don't know. The contract kind of scares me. If it was like a 1-year deal, I'd be like, sure. Maybe even a 2-year. He's still got 3 years left after this year on his contract. I don't know though. Kuzma is just interesting. It's. I think personally, he was decent on the Lakers, and he seemed more bought into defense in LA with LeBron, and seemed like an important piece in a way when they won that championship during the bubble. I think, ever since then, he was kind of giving the reins of a crappy Wizards team. And why not? Who else is there? Kuzma's a capable scorer. Probably, thought playing defense is hard. But I think Kuzma has played decent defense and is a versatile guy, versatile athletic forward. Can probably guard the small and the power forward. Not the best stretch option, but he can hit him decent from the corners. And at least he can score, too. Like, we talk about Murray, and I get it. Murray's, probably going to be a lot better next year. But Kuzma, at least for the rest of this season in the playoffs, can be that legit third scoring option that the Kings don't really have at the moment. And going forward, maybe he can go back to, I don't know if he'll want to, but that third, fourth scoring option behind Murray and maybe get a little more out of his defense. And then getting Tyus Jones for the rest of the year would be pretty good, too. It's just like, can you get anyone better going forward? You wanted him in the offseason. Like, what's the difference now? And who are you going to get next year if you get rid of Barnes? Say if you get rid of Barnes' contract and you need to pick someone up in the offseason. Like, is there going to be someone better? Is there going to be someone better to trade for? That's where the Kings really have to start, like, figuring it out. He just makes a lot of sense, but he's just kind of scary at the same time, right? You worry about his defense. Yeah. You worry about how committed he is to winning and not stat padding. But, he has a championship, and played an important role on that Lakers team. So, I don't know.
I would say this. It's definitely, I think Ham is right to say that it's definitely a possibility. And it's up to the Kings to do the due diligence to figure out whether or not it would work to the level that they need, really. And it can. I think it definitely can, and it also can't. It depends on a few things. Obviously he's got the tools to defend. Has he done it in Washington? Not necessarily, but I would cut him a lot of slack because Washington is a defense that since he's been there, I think his first year there, they were bottom 5 in the league. They were bottom 10 the following year, last year. And then this season, they're like one of the most historically abysmal defenses ever in the NBA. So how much is a defensive culture like that, which is to say really not much of a defensive culture, what does that have to do with him being motivated on that end? Whereas by contrast, you'd be getting him with Mike Brown, a guy that's really all about defense, a guy that would really allow him, they give Kuzma his offense in a lot of ways, but you'd have to imagine they'd be really hyping him up as a defender. And I think Kuzma is a guy that, just to contrast him with someone like Zach LaVine, I mentioned, I think when we talked about Zach LaVine a couple of weeks ago, that there was a article in the Chicago Sun-Times about Billy Donovan putting out a film session for his team after some big defensive mistakes, especially late in a game, led to a loss. And LaVine was asked about the mistakes in that game, and he said, I didn't really think there were that many mistakes. He clearly had some issue coming to terms with the fact that the defense wasn't that good, and he's always kind of been a little delusional about how good of a defender he is. Kuzma, by contrast, on this terrible defensive team, has been asked extensively, obviously. I mean, it's a huge topic there in Washington that this is a terrible defensive team. And I mean, he comes at it not like in a way that's like, oh, he's super motivated on the defensive end, but he's very level-headed about it. He understands that the defense is terrible and that it needs to be better and that you need defense to win. I mean, he's quoted as saying stuff like that. And the demeanor that he has with that does suggest that he knows the importance of that end in winning. And it's so hard to ever really kind of like put your best foot forward on that end of the floor when you're on these terrible teams defensively with no defensive culture, with very little motivation and actually having a chance to win anything. So I think getting him on a team like the Kings, the situation they're in, with the head coach that has a justifiable desire to improve the defensive end and has proven that, whether it was with the Warriors or some of those Cavs teams or back in his time with San Antonio, I mean, he's a guy that has the track record to show that successful teams will defend. I think he could get something out of Kuzma. I think he's got the tools to be a good defender. Can he do it? That's a question. Offensively, like you said, he could create on his own. I think if you're talking about a situation where, the Kings are all of a sudden being forced to either go away from Sabonis as a creator or move him off the floor and go Lyles at the 5 when they're facing small lineups with 5 shooters on the floor, well, Kuzma all of a sudden kind of gives you that other playmaker. Now, Kuzma's not as great of a playmaker as Sabonis, but you'd be filling in that need a little bit more. You'd be able to make those adjustments. You'd be able to have answers for small lineups. You might be able to push their hand from going away from small lineups to get Sabonis back on the floor, So I think in a lot of ways, his playmaking is a key factor in this, because I think, especially with those small lineup situations against Sabonis, I think that really brings that into the limelight there. I think, like you said, he shoots well from the corners. You're going to want that. He'll run hard to the corners probably and shoot well from there. He's successful from there. Not great from above the break, and I don't think he's a great mid-range shooter, but you'd be kind of getting that ability to get inside, ability to create for himself and maybe for other guys. He's got, again, the tools on defense. He'd be a rebounder. I mean, in a lot of ways, I could see Kuzma working, but it's just about whether or not the Kings are bought into all that. Is all that going to be the case? Because it's easy to say that there's a possibility he could do all that stuff, but is he going to check all those boxes? And do they need him to check all those boxes? It's not certain that he'll check all those boxes, and it's definitely needed that he checks all those boxes. So it's just up to the Kings at this point whether they want to do that.